Welcome to the third episode of original black metal from Finland. So mostly focusing on the 90s founded black metal. I say mostly because obviously some bands were founded already in the late 80s, but let's be honest about it, basically all the first wave of Finnish black metal didn't really happen before 1990s. Now through the two previous episodes I mentioned the really pioneer bands that kind of paved the way for Finnish black metal to begin with, meaning bands like Beherit, Imbel Nazarene, Archgoat, and so on. Now, people are obviously expecting to see bands like Horna and the like already in the early on, but let's be honest about it. Horna, while it's important part of the whole deal here and will be featured in the future episodes, next one likely, this time I'm focusing the ones that are some of the most successful ones in terms of numbers. And in case you were expecting Horna to be one, bad news for you, it isn't. Exactly what is funny with the given episode is that I couldn't guess the bands included here without looking at the actual numbers, and I had my own what the hell moment staring at them. Now, these numbers are not based on any given single factor. It would be easy to just mislead you and stare at, Facebook followers or Instagram or Spotify and so on. But I decided to look at various factors, and in the end what I found and decided to go with mostly is Last FM numbers. Why? Because they are, with their scrobble numbers, they are reflecting how much the music has been listened to rather than just looking at the follower numbers on given social medias. So here we are, bands this time, Catamenia, Ajattara and Satanic Warmaster. And there are a couple of bands which are bigger than these, but they were featured in the previous episodes, and they are namely Imbel Nazarene and Beherit. Might be a little bit surprising that in terms of Last FM numbers, Imbel Nazarene seems to be the biggest so far, but that is explained by two factors, I think. First of all, they are old as hell, one of the earliest bands, and secondly, they have so many albums out, so when a listener is going through certain albums, it's easy to just listen to more than 10 albums, which means all these numbers are kind of getting bigger and bigger versus bands like Archgoat, which only has like 5 albums out. So there is this difference. And Satanic Warmaster being one of the most actively touring band, as well as making good albums and lots of smaller releases, might have something to do with their success. But frankly speaking, I was surprised to see Catamenia and Ajattara here. First of all, well, let's go them through band to band and start with the given order which one was here first. So let's start with Catamenia from Oulu, the very same city that bands like, Imbel Nazarene and the like are from, putting Oulu as one of the capital cities in terms of black metal. I'm saying one of the capital cities because obviously the momentum shift has occurred more than once, I guess, and obviously throughout the later years, the bands have been coming from different cities. But Oulu has been always a vital, pivotal point in terms of metal music in Finland, and black metal has been one of the things that Oulu has had kind of a more or less strong foothold, or whatever you want to call it. However, one thing what I wanted to say, when I was giving you a little bit of a hint towards is that Catamenia has never been seen as a very integral part of Finnish black metal scene. Now, I'm dropping some names here to indicate what I'm really meaning. Like, if we were talking about early names like Beherit or Imbel Nazarene, Archgoat, Barathrum, or a little bit later, Horna, Sargeist, Satanic Warmaster, Clandestine Blaze, things like that. You never see Catamenia being mentioned, lumped up with these particular bands. And I can only think a couple of reasons, probably more than a dozen if you really go deeper into that. But first of all, they were always a little bit different in terms of music. And a lot of people would probably just put them in a little bit different box, which is here mentioned on Metal Hackups too as genre, melodic black metal and later melodic death gothic metal. I'll get back to that a little bit later when I'm actually describing the music. Other thing is obviously geographical thing. Catamenia was not exactly the next Imbel Nazarene in terms of touring, going about in different cities, and making big waves of being extreme, because Catamenia's music never been that extreme. So I guess it's debatable how much you want to lump Catamenia up with those other bands. You know, whether we're talking about how the presence is on stage, corpse paint, or the musical approach, or whatever, Catamenia was always a little bit on the side. Not sounding like your typical Finnish black metal to begin with, and also just keeping on the side. But that doesn't mean it's considered black metal in the big picture. And also because it is here listed as black metal, and a lot of the topics are dealing with, more or less, in a way, black metal. So here it is. And because it's bigger in terms of numbers, what can you do? You may not like it, but it's still part of the whole big scene. So Catamenia started in 1995, which in Finnish standards is still pretty early on. I mean, let's be honest about it, 5 years before that, there was not much happening. Besides Buried and Archcode, nothing was really moving. Come 1990, 1991, and things started happening. You know, being bands like Baratrum, Black Crucifixion and all. And of course, Horna was there in 1993 or so. But a lot of these bands, even if they were founded in, mid-90s or before, many of them didn't have an album out until 2001, which seemed to be the pivotal moment for a lot of Finnish bands, including my own band, which is curious, founded in 1996, and it took some 5 years to get the album out. So there are lots of these bands that started in 1993 or 1996, 1995, whatever, and the first album was out by only 2000s, 2001, seeing the most one. However, Catamenia was beating a lot of bands in that particular game. They already had their full album out in 1998, which is indeed relatively early in Finnish standards, even if a lot of Norwegian bands were doing stuff in 1991, 1992, and so forth. Just look at the early names and you know what I'm talking about. So there's a big gap in that sense, even if the birth point, the starting point, was not that different in between Norway and Finland. I mean, like, for example, if you compare to Beherit 1989 to, say, Darkthrone 1987, in terms of how black metal bands started doing albums and all in Norway versus Finland, there's a big difference. Maybe people didn't even believe in Finland or Finnish scene in terms of how things were happening in Norway and Sweden. But nonetheless, here we are. So Catamenia started quite early on in Finnish standards, and already 1999 they had the second album out, and by 2000 a third album, which means they're really beating a lot of bands in this game of who gets to release albums out. Besides a few originators, which I already mentioned, the Baratrums and the Imbel Nazarenes and the Beherits, yeah, Catamenia was there quite early on, and their style was already shaped up pretty quickly after the first demos. Melodic black metal. Actually, it's more, I would say, more Swedish style than rather typical Finnish style. I mean, after all, bands like Imbel Nazarene, Baratrum, and Beherit or Archcode has nothing to do with the style that Catamenia did. One could even say they are more mainstream. It's with the melodic, easy to approach music, never that full tempo, kind of easy to just, get into it, but honestly, also not that fascinating or unique. But they did their own stuff, and that already, of course, gathered some attraction, and as such, followers. And throughout the years, they have been really, really active until they were not. I mean, look at these early years, 1998, 99, 2000, 2002, 3, 5, 6, 8, 10, and 12. So almost like every 1 or 2 years, the band was putting out albums. So very, very active. You cannot deny that. And their style, very consistent. It's throughout all the albums, always almost doing the same kind of stuff. Not renewing them so much compared to a lot of other bands, say, from Norway or Sweden. Catamenia was more consistent. You could even say, in a way, that they are the Finnish melodic black metal equivalent to whatever Cannibal Corpse were doing. Always more or less the same. Which is a good thing if you like the given style. If not, however, well, if you don't like one album, you're most likely not going to give a fuck about the rest of them. That's why. I don't personally understand why there's so much difference, without going into details, why there's some albums are like 93 on average. In my opinion, these are all pretty much 6 out of 10 albums. Not bad, but they don't do nothing for me. Never did. Unfortunately for them, I've never been a fan. But it is what it is. And then again, we have these albums which are like 47 or 51%. I'm like, what the hell? If you would go to rate your music and see their ratings, it would be quite different, most likely. But this is how it looks on Metal Archives. One thing is very, very curious is that they always had these kind of nowadays, especially goofy covers. You know, the wolves, blurred into the whole image. Not blurred, but you know what I mean. Always there. Even if there's a female nudity, they're wolves. Even if there is something else going on, like here. We have some ice things, which doesn't even look like that finished. You have the wolves on the background, on the foreground. So it's almost like comedy gold in a way. These are not that great designs. They remind me of that goofy t-shirt dude, Ed Hardy, back in the early 2000s or late 90s, creating the weird colorful images. But at least you can't blame that. Catamenia has been very, very consistent, not only with their music, but all the covers. Always wolves, more or less, background or foreground. No need to go through them all. But my point here is, it is a very, very consistent style of melodic black metal. There are no weird moments, weird gimmicks and all that stuff. Later on they started adapting a little bit more clean vocals and such. And as such, maybe they started sliding away from your typical black metal thing. And this is kind of reflected on their, promotional photo later on. You don't see corpse paint guys, but just guys looking like their typical, Finnish whatever metal. So maybe they kind of like got bored with the black metal thing, or maybe they didn't want to carry the cross, so to speak. After all, this later on melodic death gothic metal didn't really apply until maybe the last album, Rewritten Chapters, which is just rewritten songs of the previous ones. Or maybe it started with the Cavalcade, but mostly I would put them all in the same box. Melodic, Finnish, black metal, and that's pretty much of it. It's definitely for the audience who want their black metal to be the kind of entry-level stuff. Nothing too harsh, definitely nothing too raw, nothing sketchy in terms of, symbolism, lyrics, or whatever. It's a kind of just the basic stuff. But maybe that's exactly what explains their popularity in terms of numbers. So many albums to listen to. So if you like one or two albums, you go for them all, which then again makes these numbers go high. And there are so many albums indeed that really, if all the people listen to all the albums at least once, the numbers are multiplying. And that's the story. Probably Catamenia has always been more popular outside Finland than in Finland versus, the more celebrated bands like Rauta or Satanic Warmaster and the like. But this is a band that you might keep your eyes peeled for if you like the more traditional and kind of safe, mid-tempo, black metal, with melodies and all. Like I said, nothing extreme as such, but the kind of entry-level stuff which is good for the beginners. Then we have Ajattara from Helsinki, and this was always quite of a unique band, and it is a weird story indeed. Now, most people know Mr. Ruoja, the main man from 1996, as the previous Amorphis vocalist Pasi Koskinen, even though his time in Ajattara dates back to 1996, whereas his vocals with Amorphis were 1995. So you could say, yeah, he was Amorphis guy first and Ajattara guy later, but I don't know. These are hard to really combine because Ajattara started with 2001, the first album, and Amorphis was there. But then again, his history goes before those times, like Shape of Despair, Funeral Doom before that, or the old, rather forgotten band, Saint Mucus from 1994. So obviously Pasi Koskinen was already an experienced guy when he started Ajattara. And this is a good example, by the way, what I was talking about in the Catamenia segment. First album 2001, remember. And this is just no one coincidence. There are plenty of those, which you will see later on. So Ajattara started in mid-90s also. And somehow this became one of the best success in Finnish black metal scene, which is kind of a weird because this is by no means a typical black metal in so many ways. I think a lot of people would actually put Ajattara, all in all, outside the black metal box. So you have to really have the big picture here when we're talking about black metal. First of all, some of the riffs have really very, very little to do with black metal. You could go as far as to say that, most of the albums are more like typical Finnish not black metal, but metal, the kind of a Finnish metal which is almost like a genre of its own, much like, the melodic death metal coming from Sweden is more like the own style, especially the Gothenburg style. So Ajattara style is more like actually flirting with a lot of rock and roll musicians, as well as the non-extreme metal style, with the given, very simplistic rhythms as well as riffs. Then again, the vocal style is, then again, black metal. And you could say the lyrics are in a way too, but they are quite, creepy in a way. They are weird, they are bizarre, sometimes really cool, sometimes just like, what the hell are you doing? What kind of drugs are you using, man? Now, joking aside, Ajattara is a unique case, and this goes both good and bad. Good in the sense it really stands out. Bad in the sense that sometimes it feels almost like a borderline cringe, like what the hell is this doing? As such, it's not easy to, describe the whole style the same way that Catamenia, which has been always pretty much the same. Because Itse, the first album, is actually the best Ajattara album, and this is probably the most traditional sounding black metal album of all Ajattara catalog. Then later on it started changing, already with the second album Kuolema, meaning death. Itse means self, by the way. Tyhjyys, or emptiness, followed that pretty much later on. And here it starts changing towards from the black metal to the more typical Finnish thing with the more black metal vocals. Then we have Apara, which is kind of hard to describe, but Bastard, I guess, would be closest. Kalmando, which is almost like a, I guess, I'm not really sure, but it's not really a typical Finnish word, but it's either place for the dead or dead-like. I'm not exactly 100% sure. And then we have Noituma, Witchland, Murhat, Murders, Lupaus, Promise. They started changing eventually. But there was this one album, Noituma, if I'm not mistaken, which is more like a... or now I'm thinking if I'm really confusing. Was it Noituma or was it Kalmata? Anyway, they started, doing like an acoustic album with the similar riffs, but not, not the black metal production, not the black metal kind of instruments. And it all was like, what the hell are you guys doing? Some say it's the best, and some are like, really, what the hell is going on? And later on, they started changing back with Murhat and Lupaus, which are almost like going back to the early style, but not as close as Itse. And in my opinion, it's kind of a weird roller coaster ride, because the first album is quite promising, but then it went totally different direction from what I like. And doing this kind of a mid-tempo, twisted, Finnish-sounding metal with black metal vocals. I know I'm repeating yourself, but I'm trying to figure out how to put it so that it actually makes sense. So in a way, it's black metal for people who don't like black metal. I think that that's the best description what I've read about Ajattara, and I really like about that. The funny thing is, throughout the years, the lineup has been changing quite a bit. This seems to be the nowadays updated one. I don't know how accurate it is nowadays, but if you look at these past members, it's almost as crazy as with Paratrum. So a lot of people have been changing throughout the years, and some of them are quite known for other bands. So, never being too consistent with the lineup, and especially if you look at the years here, many of them are from the new school of stuff, meaning that Ajattara had been already going on for quite some time before these kind of joined. So it is kind of a weird band in the sense that it sounds unique, but it really isn't the kind of what you would refer to when you're talking about black metal ones. And yet still, or maybe because of it, it's one of the most listened black metal band from Finland. Which is fucking curious. It's almost like looking at all the Norwegian bands, the big Norwegian black metal bands, and then picking up some Mortis out of that stuff. Like, but this isn't even black metal. It's something different. And people are like, yeah, what are you going to do about it? Anyway, Ajattara standing out musically and thematically and maybe on personal levels is curious case to be such a successful band. But maybe the reasons are what I just described. Because it doesn't sound that much of a black metal, it's easy to get into that, rather than the last band in this particular episode. And in my opinion, one of the best bands from Finland ever when we're talking about black metal. This one came a little bit late to the party, as late as 1998. But that was because mostly Satanic Warmaster's only steady member is Werewolf, who is known for a lot of other bands. Most people, especially the old school, remember him as the vocalist of Horna back in the 90s. That's when I got to know the man. And of course he had other kind of active bands throughout the years, which, what to really think about, what to point here, Blutrache, I guess, was one of the more important ones, maybe Pest. But even if these bands had their impact back in the days, essentially it comes down to Horna. And he has been part of other bands live or whatnot, or temporarily, or session members, including bands like White Death or Goat Moon Live, even Warlock Alive, etc., etc. So man of many activities, man of many talents, man of many strong opinions, which either create his fandom or make people, annoy him. What is other thing that makes Satanic Warmaster so interesting and annoyed by many is the themes he's dealing with. Certainly, mostly, I will go through in more detail when we're talking about Satanic Warmaster's own discography in the respective video, but you will see these topics like Satanism and war, darkness, whatever, vampirism, as well as National Socialism here and there scattered early on in the music. But never been an NSBM band despite what people say. If you really go calling NSBM band a band that mentions it here and there briefly, you could just say 100% of people are racist because some people are going to say something like nasty remarks every now and then. And there you go. You opened the can of worms. When we're talking about Satanic Warmaster's music, it's obviously, once again, his 2001 debut album. The demo before that is not really that good. Very mediocrity versus what happened with Strength and Honor. Already a strong raw end of black metal, paying homage to, say, Polish black metal scene, and maybe a little bit to French and other scenes as well. But here, originally, early on, you will see the Graveland vibes and whatever in the music, and that's why it is probably the best album, or one of the best albums, by Satanic Warmaster. That soon evolved through EPs like Black Catharsis, another good one, to album 2 years later, Opferblut, which is a really, really good continuation, a successor to the debut album. And then Karelian Satanist Madness 4 years later after the debut. Mind you, this is the so-called first wave of Satanic Warmaster black metal, because back in the days, the member list was basically these two guys, Lord War Torek and Mr. Werewolf. So 2000 to 2005, which is in my opinion the golden era of Satanic Warmaster. That's when these 3 albums happened, including some of the smaller releases. And then it was raw end of black metal, while having the melodies which later on pretty much put Finland on the map in terms of what you call nowadays Finnish sounding black metal, along with the bands like Horna and Sargeist and so forth. Now later on, after many splits and what have you, came Nazerer. Already quite a different take, and in my opinion probably the weakest of all Satanic Warmaster albums. Clearly the lineup has changed, and over the years the style has a little bit changed. In my opinion, this is the kind of a transition phase album, and that's a thing what I keep mentioning in a lot of other bands, because transitions do happen, and in Satanic Warmaster case, this is it. So took a little bit time to build up from that, hone the style, take it to a new level. It's almost like this is where it goes a little bit on the knees. And back on the foot it came on Fimbulwinter, which is a good album, but in my opinion not worth as 3 original albums. Then there was this long break, 8 years before Amungandr, the 6th album by the band, came to be. But as you can see, there are these demos and singles or whatever between. But if you really remove things like live albums and compilations, because essentially they're not creating new, this era sounds a little bit weird. We all know there are personal things in people's lives which affect how music is being done, how the career gets on, and obviously Satanic Warmaster has been recent years touring so much more than the early on, which is, I guess, kind of a given, but still worth mentioning. All in all, Satanic Warmaster has been always very active. Not only in terms of touring or making new music, but also on social media, and the guy who is always, talking a lot, not afraid of expressing views, which has both gained the band some enemies, some people who really dislike it or hate it or whatever, but also a steady base of followers and fans who really like it because this band is not afraid to do whatever it is. So compared to, say, Catamenia, which is the kind of a safe bet here, but not really, raising red flags or fandom that much, Satanic Warmaster is almost like opposite. One end, you have this raw end of black metal, giving middle fingers all directions, and then you have this one band that is barely making any reactions out of people, but then again steadily, going on and all. But these three bands are among the most successful in terms of numbers, how much time they're listened to and all in, coming from Finland. Not maybe the obvious trio if you really think about it. Satanic Warmaster coming a little bit late to the party versus the bands that were there earlier into 90s. But always getting a lot of attraction from people and all. So this is pretty interesting if you compare to them some older bands that these came bigger, with the exception of Buried and Imbil Nazarene. But that's how things are sometimes. You really can't predict which bands go big and how they are successful and all. Next episode I will be talking about some of the fundamental names of Finnish black metal from the 90s. Not the biggest one maybe, but still more important than a lot of other bands. So stay tuned for that. And respective retrospective videos of the bands I have interviewed, including Satanic Warmaster, Sargeist, Horna, etc., will be coming later on to the channel with more detail put into the whole discographies, including lyrics, covers, whatever. So stay tuned for that, and should you have questions or suggestions for the video series or whatever, drop me a comment in the comment section. Now off you go. Links are provided for these bands on Metal Archive site, which you can move on with the respective Bandcamp sites and other links in case you want to know more. Now, take care.